everyone, I'm Amber. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a book review. So this is called Give Me a Sign. It's by Anna Sorrentino. This was such a cute book. I have yet to read a young adult novel that focuses entirely on disabilities or a disability, and even then I don't like to call them a disability. It just, some people have this and some people don't, and you know they're human. I like reading books like that because I think it's an important topic for discussion, and it's, as a reader who is not deaf, it's a way to be educated on the deaf community. It provides excellent insight as to some of the conversations that might happen in the deaf community amongst individuals who are deaf. And if you don't have someone who is deaf in your immediate circle, I think it's a brilliant way to gain some insight and learn. And for me, who is barely learning sign language and who has a sister who majored in sign language and has been to deaf events, I have wanted to be able to communicate with individuals who have this beautiful language, and not a lot of people know how to sign, and it's really unfortunate. Even this book, I think, really touches on that. The idea of, communicating with individuals who are deaf and how they feel isolated in the outside world, and how people can treat them, and how they can be treated, and it's really sad and really messed up. So this book is about a young girl named Lila. She identifies as hard of hearing, and she learns later that, you don't have to be so X amount of hard of hearing to be considered as deaf. Um, but she kind of feels like she's not part of the deaf community, but she wants to be, and that she is. She talks a lot in the beginning about how she feels like she's in the in between, in the middle. And I think that is such a very interesting way of putting it, because she can hear certain things, and she can hear a lot of things through, like, if they're very loud or people are yelling, which is a very sad way of, communicating with people if you're just like yelling at them. She also does a lot of lip reading, but her family does not sign. Her family um, does not really take into consideration her the fact that she can only hear some things, and she always constantly, even amongst her friends, has to be like, what, I didn't hear you. And she kind of finds it to be a little bit of annoying, and she becomes annoyed with herself, especially because she's in a world, the speaking world, that not a lot of people like take the time to really try to communicate with her or really care. And they seem annoyed, so that she seems annoyed to keep trying to communicate with people. And so her mother is constantly trying, not in a way where she's trying to be mean about it or anything. She just wants, the best for her daughter. But her daughter views it as she's trying to constantly make her seem or be normal, and her daughter obviously doesn't feel like she's normal, and this makes her feel less normal and more of an outsider. Her brother is more hard of hearing than she is, and that kind of makes him feel like he doesn't have a place at all in the household, or even with her sometimes, because he feels that she doesn't fully understand. And on one side, she kind of doesn't, because she's kind of isolating herself from her deafness and not really wanting to deal with it, but then having to deal with it because it's, part of her life. And I love that we really got to see, like, her relationship with her brother, because she really does try, and they really are close because they have this in common. But then he's also different than her in that aspect, so it creates kind of like this rift between them. And she sees him struggling, and she sees how much she's struggling, with her parents and communicating with everybody else, and she knows that he's gonna struggle even more because he's even more hard of hearing, and she feels for him. And you can also see, I really appreciated their showing their relationship and how much they love each other. And you can clearly see that she loves him so much, but there is, this divide in she kind of like says in their deafness, because he she doesn't know what it's like for him and he doesn't know what it's like for her, and he is more hard of hearing than her, and she thinks she knows what's best for him, but at the same time it's like he knows what's best for him, and she has to accept that and understand that, and she also has to be able to understand herself and be able to know herself and her deafness, and to be able to have those conversations with him. The only signing that she knows is from the camp that she went to as a little girl. It's called Camp Grey Wolf, and it's for the deaf and the blind. And she learned how to sign there, majority of the signs that she knows. And she learned a few online. I think that this book brought an interesting, it shed some light on an interesting conversation on the idea of who is allowed to teach people sign language. It's like only a deaf person can give you a sign name. Um, and I think that's a really important thing, because they are someone who is living, breathing this language. It's their language. And why would you want someone who is not fully diverse and educated in this language and uses it every day teaching you this language? Why would you want someone who learned it secondly teaching it to you? Obviously, this is not something that they do live and breathe on a daily basis. And I found that really interesting, because I was watching videos and learning sign language from a video that I saw, and this lady was hearing. And so as I was reading this book, I was like, learning. I was just like, I need to find a video of someone who's deaf teaching me, you know. But there's not that many videos out there, because there's like, they, first of all, many of them are afraid to do so. And there's all these individuals who are interpreters and are learned the language and then are teaching them and putting videos out there that are gaining more traction. And so many individuals are like, so why should I put something out there? And then they bring up the topic of how, people who are deaf, some of them, they're trying to learn sign language, and this is their first, way of learning it, and they're not learning it from someone that's deaf, so they might learn it wrong. And so I thought that was really mind-blowing to like learn about that. And so this is a topic that they talk about, and there's this one individual who is an interpreter, or sorry, it's not an interpreter. She identifies as an interpreter. She still learns. She hasn't gotten her license yet. And she is basically getting, attention on the internet and everything. And everybody there at the camp, who is deaf and identifies as deaf, don't really like, that she's doing this. And they prefer that if she's doing this, she's going to be real, and that she's going to, say, I am learning because of this and this, and I hope to achieve this and this, but there's other resources out there of actual individuals who are deaf that, you should support and you should watch. I don't fully know or sign everything correctly because I am learning, and they wanted her to change her status from interpreter to, student. And that is actually better, and actually it's taking away less from the deaf community, and is in turn supporting it and providing, things that are beneficial for it, and not, downgrading it in any sort of way. It's really interesting because it reminded me of something that in my own life, me and my sister have talked about. So we both identify as Hispanic, but for a long time, we didn't know a lot of Spanish, and at least I didn't feel like I should say I spoke Spanish, because I didn't speak it perfectly. Now I know a lot more, and now they have like in job interviews that you could put that you speak some, which is great. But I had growing up a Spanish teacher who was not Spanish, who learned it as a second language, and she was teaching me Spain Spanish, which is the proper Spanish, which now that I think about it is not the Spanish that really people who are Hispanic speak unless you're from Spain or you're in Spain. But that's a separate conversation. But basically, she was teaching me, and I was hearing certain words, and I would hear that she was not pronouncing them correctly, that it was just like not the word, and all these different things. And it was just really hard to be taught Spanish by someone who didn't speak it as their first language. And me and my sister, we would hear, commercials on the Spanish channel, and these are people that didn't speak Spanish, and we're like, we would want to hear and see and be taught by a Spanish speaker. So we just feel like we're not learning or hearing it correctly, and we want to learn it authentically. And when I heard this conversation being discussed in this book, I was like, I relate to this in this way. Like, this is very similar. It's not the exact same thing, but it's interesting. And, like, obviously, it brings up a whole bunch of other topics of discussion that one can have. But I just thought it was really interesting. So one day, Lila ends up talking with her friends about what she's gonna do over, I think, the sum. I think they mentioned spring break. That's what I was confused about. But it ends up being the summer. And Lila, she's in this headspace where she really wants to communicate with people, and she's like, oh, I'm gonna get a junior counselor job at the camp I used to work at. And she's like, I am, okay. And then emails a friend that she hasn't talked to in forever, and she's trying to create those network ties and like go back to a place and a time that made her happy, and be able to educate herself, and get back into that part of her life, and that desperately needs to be figured out, and this is part of the way to do it. And it is. And so he's like, yeah, I remember you want to be a junior counselor? It's like, then she gets the email, we got you. And so then she goes, and she's a junior counselor. She makes all these friends that identify as deaf, but there's different, like, I don't want to say levels, but there's different types of deafness. One individual has a cochlear, and she speaks what she prefers not to, because she's like, I have this way of communicating, and why should I have to speak? And so she's kind of the individual who, like, really speaks her mind and says what she thinks about individuals who don't try to sign in the deaf community. And she's very pro sign language and everything, and she brings up a lot of interesting topics of conversation. Obviously, she's fed up with the hearing world, and how they don't try to communicate with her. She brings up a story about her dad and how nobody told her what was going on with him when he was in the hospital, and that's why she got the cochlear, because she was upset. But then now it's kind of like a part of her, so she does use it, but it does frustrate her. And then here's Lila, trying to figure out where she falls into all of this. There's individuals who are fully deaf, who don't speak, who sign, and they don't use, there's different, I guess, forms. I'm not going to say that I'm educated in this in any way, shape, or form, but from what I got from it, there's like signing that you use as like you're beginning to learn and everything, and then there's obviously like the harder one where there's different words that are formed together. It's more quicker, more advanced. Essentially ends up feeling like another amongst people of her own community, and she feels kind of made fun of because she signs wrong, or she has to keep asking like, what did you say, and everything. And she meets this guy named Isaac, who is the love interest in the story, and she appreciates that he kind of slows down for her, that he spells things out for her, and others grow frustrated because they're like, why does he need to like dumb it down for you? You should know. And she's like, well, I'm trying, and they're like, nobody sees it from her point of view. And yeah, so there's people that, she kind of has like little tiffs with, misunderstandings, but they all end up becoming friends. She ends up taking care of, all these kids, some of them being deaf, some of them being blind. We see there's this character named Blake who refused to learn sign language, who only wanted to use her hearing aids, and then at the end learned sign language and is excited to learn sign language. But her parents, or her dad, it seems, doesn't advocate for her using sign language. And it kind of reminds me of how Lila's parents were, and they kind of want her to seem more normal. Of course, it's not coming from the same place that I think Blake's dad, like, his is like, he's very sarcastic, he's very like, no. And I think that Lila's mom, they have a very good conversation at the end. She just, wants the best for her, and she apologizes, and she just wants to be able to communicate with her daughter, and hates that there's this, divide between them. And Lila explains to them that it'd be easier if you learn how to sign. It would make things a lot easier for me, for my brother. And then there's a point where they're kind of forcing her brother to get the cochlear implant. And she's like, only do it if you want to. Don't let mom and dad, convince you. Only if you want it, if you need it. And it's interesting because Natasha's the girl who's like speaking her mind. Lila ends up having a conversation with her about the cochlear implant because she has it, and then she's like, I got it because of this and this and that. But then another person comes in and says, well, it might not be a bad thing, it's up to the person and everything. And it kind of counters what Natasha is saying. I don't know exactly what they said, but and Natasha's like, interesting, it's a different viewpoint. It's not saying that she's right or wrong, but it's, all these different people with all these different viewpoints and ideas and everything, who all identify as deaf and are all part of the community, but some have, different insights, different stories. Which is really interesting because, everyone who's part of the same community, like, don't all think the same way. And that's totally realistic to, like, any community or any person in this world. I think is really great for Lila. I think he brought her closer to her brother. I think he helped her grow a lot. The situation where his car didn't go through and then he ended up being taken to the station was really unfortunate, and it really brought things to perspective for Lila and a lot of the other counselors. There was tension at first because, there was all these different opinions and differences and ideas, but ultimately they all forgave each other. I thought that Isaac was gonna not talk to Lila for a bit because Natasha was like, oh, sometimes he distances himself, but then he comes back, and I'm like, yay. And then at the end, like, he doesn't talk to her for a bit. I'm like, is he gonna talk to her? And then he calls her, and it's like, yay. But I also really liked the lifeguards, and I liked how there was a potential love story between one of them and Lila, but then they ended up like being gay, and it was so cute. But they like really like were wanting to like learn and like communicate with her, and I thought that was really great too. I thought it was such an empowering and educational book, and then it had a lot of cheesy and cute moments as well. It was really realistic in a really fun way, so I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you all real soon. Bye!